So good morning. This is our recorded discussion for the first topic in your general biology 2, and that is on anatomy and physiology. So what we will be doing in this session would be to group the different organ systems according to their connected function. So the first on our list would be the organ systems that are responsible in the provision for framework protection and even support. So first on that would be the skeletal system. So when we talk about the skeletal system, basically it's responsible in working hand in hand with the muscular system in providing framework so the our body can do movements, specifically the skeletal muscles. So first off, of course, is the skeletal system is responsible in the provision for support. So it provides us with the ability to stand up, to sit down, to walk, to run, and do other locomotory functions. Okay, so aside from that, it also helps us to protect specifically the vital organs in the body. So, like for example, the skull or the cranium would be responsible in protecting or encasing our brain. The ribs would be responsible in protecting our lungs and our heart. And then we have um, our pelvic area, which would protect our organs, which are located in the uh, middle part of our body. Okay, so aside from that, of course, another function would be this one is actually a coordinated function with the muscular system because movement or locomotion is a function of the body that will allow us to become more mobile. So mobilization function. Okay, so it works hand in hand with our skeletal muscles. Okay, aside from that, the fourth function would be factory. So meaning our skeletal system, our bones, specifically our long bones like the femur, like the humerus, and the tibia, would be responsible in the blood cell formation or what we call hematopoiesis. So that is the formation of the blood cells, which are basically happening in our red bone marrow. Okay, so aside from that, we also have another function which is storage. So our bones would also serve as a storage and a releasing area for calcium in the body. Okay, so these are very significant roles. Now, our skeletal system would be comprised of two specific areas. So these are some of the bones and then their common names. Okay, so we'll look into them later on. So the two main parts, okay, of our skeletal system would be the first one would be the eggshell skeleton. So when we say eggshell skeleton, it's axis. So from the term axis, so it comprises our middle portion. So you have from the head region down to the chest area and then the abdominal region. Okay? And then you have the appendicular skeleton, which would make up, as represented in the diagram, the one with the orange color. Okay? So the appendages, so our arms, and then our from the hips down to our legs. Okay, so those are the two main divisions of our skeletal system. So let me just repeat. So you have the axial skeleton, so that's the axis. So it would make up our skull down to the spinal column and then the rib cage, the sternum. Okay, and then for the appendicular skeleton, that would make up our upper appendages, so our arms, our hands, and then our lower appendage, so from the pelvic area down to uh, the toes, okay, or the legs of our body. So there, and you have there for a typical, an average adult human body. So we have around 206 bones. Okay, so some of which, when we are still young, we have more bones because some of the bones here have not yet fused. Like for example, the bones in this particular area. So this is basically made up of around five bones, but as we mature, it fuses and becomes only one bone. Okay, so there. So that's why we only have around 206. Now you can also see here already, just by looking at the diagram, the differences of the bone structure in terms of the shape, in terms of their appearance. Okay, so you would see that there are some bones which are long, and then they have a rather circular edge. Other bones are a bit flat. Okay, and then of course, one exclusive shape of a bone would be the one that is found in our spinal column. Okay, so they are irregularly shaped. Okay, so like this one, for example. So bones can be classified according to their shape and structure. So you have the one that is found in our chest area, the one that connects our rib cage. So you have the sternum. So the sternum is a type of a flat bone. Um, this is connected to the cartilage that connects also to our seven ribs that protect our lungs and our heart. So another one, we have the irregularly shaped bone of our spinal column. So it looks like this one. And then the middle portion here would be the location for the spinal cord. So the spinal column protects our spinal cord. Okay. Another one would be the long bone. So a more familiar type of bone, which can be found in our arms and our legs. Okay. So you have the long bone. So dito basically nangyayari yung blood cell formation. Okay. Then you have the sesamoid bone. So a bit circular in nature, like the patella or the knee bone in particular. So you have here, so sesamoid, and then you have the shorter bones, which would make up our wrist, our hands, and then our ankles and our from the toes area. So you have the tarsals, metatarsals, and then the carpals, metacarpals. So there. So these are the different types of your bones, and then of course you have a special type of bone, which is called the sutural bone, which would be the one that makes up our cranium, our skull. Okay, so it's called sutural because it's actually made up of several bones, but they are connected by a joint which is called the suture joint. So it's an immovable type of joint. Okay, so there. So basically, all these would work together to provide protection. Now, let us just focus on this particular area here. We have the rib cage. So we have seven, which are specifically attached to the sternum via a cartilage. Now, the last few pairs, specifically the one that's connected to the seventh rib, it's actually fused together um, using a cartilage. Okay, so a cartilage connects indirectly to the sternum because this provides for uh, expansion of the lungs, especially when you are breathing. Okay? Now there are two pairs which are called floating ribs. They're called floating because they are not actually connected to the last pair of ribs or the cartilage. So they are just there floating and protecting our, specifically the organs connected here. You have the kidneys. Okay, so there. So basically this one provides for protection of the different organs. Now, on top of our, just around our neck, we have two specific uh, irregular bones there that would allow for uh, a limited movement of our head. So you have the axis and then the atlas, which makes up the initial portion of our spinal column. So this allows us to look from left to right and then nod, okay, up and then down, but not move the head totally 360 degrees. So there is a limited motion. So with the help of the atlas and then the axis. So there. So that's for our skeletal system. Now, moving further, we have the role of our muscular system. So let us just um, go back to the idea that the muscular system, specifically the skeletal muscles, they work hand in hand with our skeletal system, the framework. So if the human skeleton provides the framework, the muscular system would um, provide the point of attachment. Okay, so they would be attached to our skeletal, the skeleton, so that the body will have a shape. And with that shape, along with it, of course, you have the movement, okay, or the motion. So that's the reason why we can stand, we can walk, we can sit, and do other locomotory functions. So apart from that, apart from working with our skeletal system, of course, the muscular system is responsible in um, many other functions, okay, like the provision for heat. Okay, so the thermoregulation function of the body is also hand in hand working with our nervous system. So it helps also to circulate blood. This is a function that is connected to the circulatory system because you have one muscle there, the cardiac muscle, which is responsible in pumping at least around 5 liters of blood um, per minute. Okay, and then of course you have the work that is connected to the digestive system when you have peristaltic movement of the smooth muscles that is to propel the food from the mouth to the different parts of our digestive tract. Okay, so in terms of the structure, the muscular system is basically made up of three different kinds of muscles. So you have the skeletal muscle, which would be directly connected to our skeleton. So they are the ones that mainly function for locomotion or movement. Okay? And then this is working hand in hand with the um, skeleton. So using your contraction and relaxation mechanisms of the skeletal muscles. Now, another type of muscle tissue would be the smooth muscles. So you have here the smooth muscles are basically spindle shaped, and then they are for involuntary motion. So, for example, the propelling of food from the mouth down to the esophagus, and then the stomach, and then the intestines, then down to the anus. Those are involuntary motions, which are, of course, controlled by um, our brain, which would be responsible in the propulsion of food, okay, so that the food will be processed technically or metabolically speaking. Now, another type of muscle which is exclusively found in one specific organ, so we have the cardiac muscle. So it is a type of muscle tissue that makes up our heart, and this is responsible in pumping blood throughout our body via the pulmonary, systemic, and coronary circulation. So, in terms of the muscle map of the body, so these are some of the common. There's no need for you to memorize them, but at least be familiar of them. Okay, like the most common ones are the muscles that would help raise our shoulders and then allow us also to do upper appendage movement. So you have the deltoids, the biceps, and then the triceps, and then our pectoralis major and pectoralis minor, which are, of course, basically part of our chest area. And then you have in the back part, if we are flexing, for example, our back region, we have your traps or the trapezius, and then you have the lats or the latissimus dorsi. So that makes up our back part. Okay. And then in the lower extremity of our actual region. So you have your abdominal area. So that's the rectus abdominis. And then you have the external obliques. And you have also the muscles that make up our buttocks. So you have your gluteus maximus and gluteus minimus. And then, of course, you have your for movement of the leg area specifically, you have the hamstrings, then you have the calves or the um, gastrocnemius, which would allow us, of course, to do walking, running, and many others. So those are just some of the few common muscles in the human body. Well, there are a few more. Like for example, if we focus on our facial region, so you have the ones that would be found around the eyes. So you have the um, oris, so orbicularis, um, oculi, and then the ones that surround our mouth region. So you have the orbicularis oris. So you also have the part of the cheekbone. So you have the zygomaticus, okay, which are attached to the zygomatic bone. Okay, so those are a few more of the different muscles that are found in our um, body. Okay? So again, the muscles are responsible in providing for heat, especially if the body needs it, and then regulating also heat production as we do our metabolic activities. Okay, so the next one, which would serve for providing protection, would be the integumentary system. So the integumentary system does not solely lie on the external integument like the skin, but we also have internal integuments which would provide protection to the different organs. Okay? So the integumentary system would be responsible in providing for, specifically the skin, would be responsible in providing for the first line of defense. So you have here three important layers of the skin. So you have the outermost layer where you would find the hair growth, damages to external pressure. So you have the epidermis. It's actually around 7 layers thick of tissues, okay, which are pushed outward so that they would be constantly repaired, especially if they're exposed to several factors that would damage them. Okay. Now, the most active layer, we call it the dermis region or the dermis layer. Why is it called the most active? Because this is the region which would contain majority of the blood vessels, the nerve tissues, and you also have the different glands like the sebaceous gland, which would secrete sebum or oil, and then you have the um, sweat glands. Okay, so you have the apocrine and then the eccrine glands would be responsible in secreting directly sweat to the skin, or even the apocrine, which would secrete uh, sweat in our hair, the hair follicles, for example. And then the next layer would be the what we call the subcutaneous layer, or what we call the hypodermis. So the hypodermis, this is the layer that is made up of fatty tissues, mostly adipose tissues, which are connected to underlying muscles. Okay, so it provides some form of a cushioning, and then um, an interaction between the skin and then the initial layer of muscle tissue. So parang ano siya, kapag nagkaroon ng aksidente, for example, accidental bumping in the skin layer, so it serves like a shock absorption so that the underlying muscles will not be damaged or will not be affected greatly. Okay, so our integumentary system has for its role or function the following. So one would be protection, so from other external hazards. Another one is the excretion function, which would be responsible in removing excess salt, water, and waste products in the body through perspiration. Then you have thermoregulation. Okay, so the tissues, like this one, for example, if you notice, there is a specific muscle that is connected to the hair follicle. So this particular muscle called the erector pili. Whenever the body is experiencing extreme cold. So the tendency is this muscle tissue would contract, and that contraction would allow the shortening of the muscle, and the hair follicle would actually rise up. So that rising up of the hair follicle would allow would actually prevent the escaping of heat. Okay, so it maintains heat inside the body. Now, if the erector pili relaxes, so it releases the hair follicle, and that actually prevents that expels excess heat in the body. Okay, so ganun yung thermoregulatory function. One example. Okay, another one is in the skin, of course, you have melanocytes, or these are cells in the skin that would produce melanin. Aside from there, you have also keratinocytes. These are cells that would help produce keratin, which is a type of protein that helps, of course, our hair, our nails to become stronger. Another one, it synthesizes vitamin D3, specifically if you are exposed to um, the sun, like in the early period in the morning. It would allow you to absorb sunlight and then convert that into some form of a vitamin. Okay. Aside from that, of course, you have the hypodermis which would be storing lipids. Okay, so in the fatty tissues, which are responsible also for a temporary source of energy and then heat. Okay. Another one, it detects sensory information because remember in the dermis region, so let me just go back. So in the dermis region, you have here active sites because of the presence of nervous tissues and other important structures that would allow the skin to be responsive. Okay. Another one is for coordination with immune response. Remember that our integumentary system also functions as our first line of defense. Okay, first line of defense against microorganisms. Okay, that's because of the secretion of the sebum and then the sweat glands. Okay, so in our integumentary system, we can actually divide the components, specifically the skin, okay, into the cutaneous membrane. So this one would make up the epidermis and then the dermis layer. And then you have the accessory structures. So these accessory structures, like for example, the hair follicles, which are also embedded in the dermis layer. You have the glands, the exocrine, the apocrine, and then the eccrine glands, which would be responsible in the secretion of certain substances like oil, like excess water. Okay. And then you have also the nails. So the nails would be hardened. These are keratinized region, which would protect our fingers and our toes. Okay, so there. So these ones would make up our integumentary system. Now, aside from that, we also have our immune system, which would also function for mainly for providing protection and support to our body. So it fights infections, specifically if the infection already reached internally. So if the integumentary system was not able to provide the immediate protection, and still pathogenic organisms like bacteria, viruses, fungi, and many others penetrated out the body. So it's the immune system that would do internal protection. Okay, so we have different immune glands or immune cells that would be responsible in fighting off these infections. So some of these are actually produced in the spleen. So this one would be responsible in storing lymphocytes and in filtering the blood so that the blood will be clean. Okay, that's why in some cases, if the lymphatic system is working, we have inflamed lymph nodes, and that's an indication that your lymphatic and your immune systems are really working hard in protecting you from these organisms. Okay. We also have the thymus gland, which would be responsible. So it's just located somewhere in our chest region, so just behind the sternum. So this is the site where killer T cells are produced and they mature. So killer T cells are responsible in protecting our body internally by killing these microorganisms. Okay, and then you have, of course, the bone marrow, where you have the formation of the blood cells, specifically the white blood cells. Okay? So there. So apart from that, we also have in our mouth region, the largest would be the tonsil. So this one would provide an immediate protection whenever you have infection in your mouth or orally. Then we have the lymph nodes, which would comprise our lymphatic system, of course. And then you have the appendix, which would be presumed to be home to good bacteria, which would protect our, specifically our colon or our large intestine. Okay, and then you have different lymphatic tissues which surround our body, so that there would be immediate cleaning and immediate action whenever there are microorganisms that would invade the body. Okay, so our immune system, we have two specific types of responses. So you have your innate immune system and then your adaptive response or adaptive immune system. So what is the difference between the two? So when we say innate immune system, so this would provide one physical barrier. So like the skin, you have also the mucosal covering of the different organs, like the mucus that surrounds our intestines, and then the mucus also that would surround our lungs. Okay, so there, and then we also have chemical barriers like the acids that are produced in our stomach, and then of course the lysozymes that are produced in our lacrimal gland, in our eyes specifically. And then we have an innate response with the help of our white blood cells. So this one is called the inflammatory response cells. So you have the mast cells, neutrophils, macrophages, and then the natural killer cells. So these are inflammatory response cells. So if there is a detection of a pathogenic organism, so they would be after the B cells identify them. So these are the ones that are sent to eat and kill the pathogenic organism. Okay, so we have here your system linkage between the innate and the adaptive immune system. We have what we call the dendritic cells. Now, when we say adaptive immune system, this could be cell-mediated response, or it could be humoral response. So meaning, if we have cell-mediated response, you have here the role of the lymphocytes, the T lymphocytes, which are produced basically in the T cells. So these are the killer T cells, which would attack directly the microorganism. And then you have the humoral response, which would be a response coming from the B lymphocytes, wherein these B lymphocytes will identify the antigen so that they will know what particular antibody to produce. Okay, so B lymphocytes produce the antibodies which would attach to the microorganism so that the body will be able to detect them properly. So, okay. And then, of course, you have what we call also acquired immunity. So when we say acquired immunity, this one is a type of immunity that you develop during your lifetime. So we have two kinds of acquired immunity. So one is called active immunity. So it could be something natural, meaning the body, di ba nga, here you have humoral response. So the B lymphocytes detect the antigen so that they would know what particular antibody to produce. Now, if there is a natural response, natural active immunity, meaning the body is already able to produce the correct antibodies whenever a certain pathogenic organism is detected. Now, if it is artificial active immunity, so you have antibodies developed in response to a vaccination. So you get a vaccine, and then the body will try to recognize, like for example, that's an inoculated type of vaccine. So inoculation, meaning your body received a dead or a weakened form of a microorganism, and then through that vaccine, your body can recognize, okay, what particular microorganism that is, and then it could provide already the response by giving the correct antibody against that antigen. Now, if we say passive immunity, so one would be natural. This is what we get from nursing our young. So for example, si nanay, pag naunang nag-breastfeed siya, so the very first milk from the breast, so it contains what we call the colostrum, which would be high in immune cells, which gets passed on to the child upon breastfeeding. Okay? And then you also have artificial passive immunity. So these are received from medicine or even from injection or infusion. Okay, so there. So that's what we call acquired immunity. Now, if there is an injury in the body, so for example, you got wounded, So the inflammatory response happens like this. So in the inflammatory response, so you have here the formation of, kasi na-puncture yung, let's say for example, up to the dermis layer of the skin. Immediately this one would get infected, specifically if the tool was not sterile. So it gets infected, and then this may actually cause swelling, okay, around the tissue. So this particular infection would allow the releasing of chemical signals, or what we call histamines. Now, the histamines would lead to an increase in temperature, kasi ang mangyayari dyan, the white blood cells would detect that there is a pathogenic invasion, and then there is a wound in a specific area. And then what will happen there is that you have redness in the region kung saan nasugatan, and then aside from redness, there would also be inflammation. So nagsuswell din siya. And in some cases, nagkakaroon ng formation of pus around the area. Okay, so in that case, if there is an increased level of histamine, so that would also increase the temperature. Okay, so tataas, lalagnatin kapag nagkaroon ng infection. Pag nilagnat, that is actually a natural way by which the body protects itself. So the high fever would allow the denaturation of the cell membrane of the microorganism, like a bacteria, for example. Pero there are cases wherein the bacteria is able to the bacteria are able to survive yung high temperature. So that's the time that you have increased response by our white blood cells. So magsisend na ma-identify ng B lymphocytes anong klaseng microorganism yung nandun. And then you have the killer T cells, which will go there and then kill the pathogenic organisms. Okay? Magsusubside ang temperature kapag bumaba na yung infection. Okay? So phagocytes, upon killing the microorganisms, so pag may mga debris yan, so kakukunin yan ng mga phagocytes, and then they will send it to our lymph nodes. Kaya yung ating lymph nodes, sometimes they would swell, because the swelling is a natural indication that the immune system is working along with the lymphatic system. So yun. And then eventually, the wound will close, and then the skin, the surface would also flatten, okay, because the inflammatory response is active and it is successful. Okay, so there. So that's for the organ systems that would provide for protection, support, and coordination. Okay, so framework also. Now the next set would be the organ systems responsible for the distribution of nutrients, the circulation of blood, and along with that, of course, you have the nutrients, and then the waste products, and then you have respiration and excretion. So these are the organ systems that work together in order to deliver food and gases throughout the body. So the first organ system would be the digestive system. So let us just recall that the digestive system has, for its main function, one would be the ingestion of food. So ingestion, as humans, we are ingestive with heterotrophs, so we take in the food and we process it. So ingestion would start in the mouth, of course. So you have here in the mouth. So the journey of the food would be through our digestive tract, or our alimentary canal or alimentary tract. So it's a direct pathway of the food. It touches the food. So like from the mouth going to the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, large intestine, the rectum, and then the anus. So that's a direct pathway. And along with that, of course, we have accessory organs. Okay, so accessory organs like the liver, the pancreas, we have the appendix, could be liver, pancreas specifically, are the ones that produce substances that would help process the food. Okay? So aside from ingestion, of course, you have the absorption of nutrients. So absorption of nutrients, that specifically happens in the small intestine. So there are structures there that would allow for an increased surface area for absorption. So you have the villi and then the microvilli. And then, of course, you have the large intestine, which would absorb excess water and produce vitamin K. And then the rest of the undigested materials will undergo digestion via the anus and then the rectum and then the anus, of course. Okay, so there. So let us just try to track the pathway of the food. So from the mouth, so you have here already the start of mechanical digestion. When the food is broken down into smaller pieces. Now, once the food is mixed with saliva, you already have chemical digestion there in the mouth because the salivary amylase would break down the carbs present in the food. So these ones would be broken down initially into their constituent parts. Okay, so mechanical and chemical digestion happens in the mouth. Now it is pushed. The food that is mixed with saliva would already be called the bolus. So the bolus would be pushed backward by the tongue. So it will go to the common passageway of air and food. So the pharynx, then down to the esophagus. Okay, so the larynx. So there is a tissue here, a flap of tissue that would close the airway or the trachea, and then it would proceed to the digestive tract, which we call the esophagus. The esophagus would be responsible in peristaltic movement since it's a smooth muscle. So there is peristalsis to allow the food to go down from the mouth to the stomach. Now, once it reaches the stomach, the bolus turns into chyme. So chyme is already a mixture of bolus plus chemical like hydrochloric acid, gastric juices, and many others. So there are also enzymes that are present in the stomach, which would be responsible in the production of, in the breaking down of food. Like, for example, protein would be broken down into amino acid, and then um, the other substances would also be broken down so that they will be turned into absorbable units. Okay, so from the stomach, you have the traveling of the chyme to the small intestine. So in the small intestine, we have microvilli that would help in the absorption. But prior to that motion, the food will have to be neutralized first. So the bile that is secreted by the liver will be secreted in the first part of the small intestine, which is the duodenum. So that secretion of bile would help neutralize the acidity of the chyme, so that as the chyme travels to the small intestine would be protected. Okay? So most of the absorption of nutrients occurs in the uh, jejunum part of the small intestine. So, majority of these nutrients, which are already converted into their building blocks, like you have the monosaccharides, you have the amino acids, the nucleic acids, so they're already in their absorbable units, so they will be absorbed in the small intestine. Now, most of the undigested materials will proceed to the large intestine for further absorption of water, and then production of vitamin K. So as they travel, so they harden and then they proceed to the rectum, which would serve as a temporary storage of undigested food prior to it moving out of the body. What's the role of the pancreas here? So it is for the balancing of the sugar level, because it can produce either insulin or glucagon. So insulin would be for the lowering of the sugar level, and then glucagon would be increasing the sugar level. So that's for the digestive system. Then we continue with uh, the circulatory system. So, what is the role of the circulatory system? So, it is for the movement of, for circulation of blood, and the blood would contain the following. Of course, you have oxygen, you have carbon dioxide, you have the nutrients from the food, and then, of course, you have the transportation of hormones. Okay? Heat, and then even waste chemicals or urea. Wait lang. Bilisan niyo pa nga ako yung...
1, 2, 3, 5. Solid. Kawan ko rin ako.
Hindi pa yan yung ano kasi wala pang 3, 5.
2, 3, 5.
And,
Sir, baka na-discount na siya, ba't di mo di ba?
ano nang, ano,
Third or fourth.
di nga nagre-reply si, ano, Fruit Godoy. Kasi nagpapa-discount ako. Tinatawagan ko siya, hindi ba siya sumasagot.
So, hindi pa nga din yung final natin, sir.
Hindi pa ata, ano, kasi kunwari kung magka-transpo kayo, tapos yung initial, ano, subsidy sa teacher, ganun, eh wala pa. Ang siningil ko lang kasi nga bala kong i-deposit na yan sa land, ay sa Metrobank nila para wala na akong dalang pera na malaki.
Okay po, sir. Sige, sige po.
Okay, so we continue with, of course, our circulatory system. So like what I have mentioned, these transported materials are the following. So you have a combination of the gases, uh, the nutrients from the food, hormones, and even waste products from the different tissues of the body. So the circulatory system is mainly made of the main organ, the main pumping station, which is the heart, and then the vessels that would help transport nutrients, gases, and even waste products. You have the veins, which carry blood to the heart, the arteries, which carry blood away from the heart, and then the capillaries, which are the connecting vessels to the different tissues. Okay, so the heart would have the following parts. You have, of course, this one. The number one would be the main vessel, main artery, which is called the aorta. The pulmonary arteries and veins are located or found in the, which are connected to the lungs, of course. And then you have the chambers, the ventricles, and then the atria. And then you have the inferior and superior vena cava. So these are the main veins, which would be the gathering sites for uh, the oxygenated blood. Okay, so basically these are all located in our different tissues because the circulatory system is further classified into three major circulations. So you have the pulmonary circulation, which would deliver the oxygenated blood. So from the different tissues, pupunta yun sa ating lungs so that it will be exchanged with oxygen. And then oxygenated blood will go back to the heart to perform naman this time systemic circulation. So from the heart, going to the different tissues or organs of the body. And then, of course, the heart also has its own circulation, which is called the coronary circulation. That is the delivery of oxygenated blood to the heart. So it's a coordinated function of the different tissues in the body. Okay, so a closer look of the heart. Okay, so kung susundan natin, for example, unahin natin yung sinasabi natin na uh, pulmonary circulation. So the pulmonary circulation would actually begin from the gathering of the oxygenated blood or oxygen poor blood from the upper extremities. So it will enter what we call the superior vena cava. Okay, so superior vein. And then we have the inferior vena cava. So this would gather oxygen poor blood from the lower extremities. So it would proceed to the right atrium. So magbababa yan, maiipon dito sa right atrium. And then it will go down the right ventricle. And then there would be a flap of tissue here, the pulmonary valve. So lalabas yung oxygen poor blood papunta sa pulmonary artery. Okay, so if you notice the pulmonary artery, this is leading from the heart to the lungs. So pagpunta ni oxygen poor blood sa lungs, so mangyayari yung tinatawag natin na gas exchange in the alveoli of the respiratory system, the lungs. Okay, so from the alveoli, so magkakaroon ng gas exchange. So this becomes oxygen-rich blood or oxygenated blood. So it will return to the heart via the pulmonary vein. So from the lungs, papasok siya sa pulmonary vein, and then it will enter the left atrium. So this is the upper chamber, and then the oxygen-rich blood gets collected here, and then it will be pushed downward by the mitral valve papunta sa left ventricle and then down to the or getting into the opening of the aortic valve and then outside the aorta. So the aorta would be the main artery leading to the traveling of the oxygen-rich blood from the heart going to the different parts of the body. So ito papunta na siya sa different organs natin or different tissues natin na magpe-perform naman ng tinatawag natin na systemic circulation. Okay, so the heart is actually very much overworked because it cannot afford to actually stop beating. Kasi kung ginawa niya yun, abay mamamatay na din tayo pagka ganyan. Okay, so in this diagram, you can see here three of the important circulations in the body. So you have the pulmonary circulation. So let me just repeat. This is a type of circulation that would involve the heart and the lungs. So this is gas exchange. And then you have systemic circulation. This one would involve the heart and then the different tissues or the different organs in the body. So what would be responsible in delivering these nutrients? The oxygen and then the waste products, it would be the capillaries which are found in the different tissues of the body. And then of course you have coronary circulation, which would be a circulation that is exclusively from the heart and then going to the heart. because the heart would also need a supply of oxygen and then nutrients so that it's going to be able to pump blood efficiently. So this one is the coronary circulation. Okay. Now let's continue with the respiratory system naman. So here, what you have to remember lang is the mechanism, the breathing mechanism. Okay, and how gas is exchanged from being oxygen deprived to being oxygen rich. Okay? So, in terms of the pulmonary respiration, or what we call basically as ventilation, so you have your inspiration and expiration. So, inspiration would be the taking in of air, and then expiration would be the removal of carbon dioxide from our respiratory system. So when we talk about external respiration, this would be happening between the lungs and then our blood cells. Okay, so that's in our alveoli specifically. Internal respiration would be between the blood and then the different cells in the body. And then cellular respiration, this would be within the tissues, wherein the nutrients, like glucose, for example, with the presence of oxygen, will produce the necessary products, carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, and then water, which is also reused by the body, and then of course ATP or energy. So there. So these are the three kinds of respiration. Let me just repeat. External is between the lungs and the blood. Internal is between the blood and then the cells of the body, and then cellular respiration. This is already the production of energy in the different tissues of the body. So this one would be a picture of external respiration. So from the lungs, so if the air, for example, enters our nasal cavity, our nose, and then it goes to the pharynx and then the larynx and then the trachea down to the bronchi and then the bronchioles. So in the at the tips of the bronchioles, you have grape-like structure which are called alveoli. So inside the alveoli, this one is one cell thick, so it's directly connected to the capillaries, wherein you have the fast diffusion of oxygen and then carbon dioxide. So gas exchange is happening in the alveoli as we take in and breathe out oxygen. Okay, so there. Now let's continue with our urinary system. So if the respiratory system is responsible in the expulsion of gaseous waste like carbon dioxide, si urinary system naman is responsible in expelling liquid waste in the body. So we have two main organs here. We have our kidneys and then our three actually. So the kidneys, we have the two bean-shaped structure here, which would be responsible in filtering blood and then removing excess water. And this excess water will be expelled through the urethra in the form of urine. And some of the excess water would actually move out of our skin in the form of sweat naman. Now, the role of the kidney is very important in thermoregulation. Okay, so mahalaga na dapat nababalance yung pag-retain ng tubig at saka yung pag-remove ng excess na water. Okay, so there. So very sensitive din ang ating urinary bladder because even if it's just half filled, it already sends a signal to our brain that it needs to remove already the water kaya tayo ay naiihi. Okay, so there. So in the excretory system, I will not be discussing anymore specific structures in the urinary, but if we are going to take a longitudinal section of the kidneys, we would see their specific structure, which is called the um, the nephrons. The nephrons are the filtering units inside the kidneys. So doon nangyayari yung pag-filter ng blood. So ihihiwalay yung mga urea, mga excess na salts, tsaka yung excess na water para sila ay mailabas sa ating laman. So nephrons ang tawag doon. Okay, so there are other excretory organs. So you have the skin, for example. We have talked about it already. So this is the first line of defense. Aside from that, we have the structure which would be responsible in removing excess water through sweating or perspiration. Okay, then we have the large intestine, which would be responsible in the uh, formation of the feces or the solid waste in the body, which would be stored in the rectum, of course. Now, for the control systems, we will have a separate recording of this one later.